Well, welcome everyone. I'm Cheshire Mayerson, the current president of Cascade Mycological Society, and welcome to our April meeting. We normally meet on the third Wednesday of the month at the Amazon Community Center in Eugene, Oregon. However, due to stay-at-home orders, we are now offering our open to the public meetings online. At this point, we anticipate our May meeting to also be streamed online, and we hope to continue to offer online events. We always announce all public meetings and events on our website, cascademyco.org, the CMS Facebook webpage, and on our Twitter feed. I'm pleased to introduce our speaker tonight, who is Trent Blizzard. Trent and his wife, Kristen, are based in Glenwood Springs, Colorado. Professionally, they own Blizzard Press, a web design and marketing company. Their technical backgrounds were certainly helpful towards getting CMS headed down this virtual road, which we thank them for immensely. But if you really want to get Trent and Kristen excited, just bring up the subject of foraging. Their love for foraging for both wild plants and mushrooms has led them to create their very popular website, modernforager.com. They forage in their own area regularly, but also head to Oregon as often as their schedule allows. They forage for all types of edible mushrooms on the coast near Reedsport, where they have property, and forage right around there regularly. I've gone with them. It's wonderful. But their fondest Oregon adventures involve hunting for burn morels in the spring. Unlike most people who just head out and drive for miles on end to find a handful of morels, Trent and Kristen love to utilize science and mapping technology to locate prime terrain well in advance of hitting the ground in Oregon. Tonight, Trent is going to tell us about some of their secrets of how they create their Oregon burn morel strategy each year and collect buckets and buckets of morels. Trent.
Hi, thanks, Cheshire.
Hi.
I was going to introduce Kristen here. She's with me.
Oh, excellent.
Good to see you.
I'll be doing most of the talking today, all the talking. Hey, we have an immediate problem with YouTube. It's just not streaming in there very well. We tested it out, it worked. I don't know what's going on. We are recording this video, and certainly tonight we will have it uploaded to YouTube where you can watch it. And if anybody is on YouTube, there's plenty of room over here if you want to pop into the webinar and start watching it live as well. I apologize for that error. Technology's great. So welcome everybody. A couple of house cleaning items here. You have a chat going on. You can see there's a chat. If you look in here, you can chat with each other and you can chat with me. I won't be watching the chat too much. There's also a Q&A, and that's a great place to put in your questions. I'll be watching that pretty closely here, and some questions are coming in, and we do have still no YouTube, so that's going to be tough. I apologize for that. But we will have it up on YouTube tonight for sure, because I am running a recording of this right now. All right, so let's get on with it without further ado. Here's Kristen and I. I'll center this a little better for you. And our dogs, we travel to Oregon every year, every spring, and we hunt morels, and we've been doing it for several years now. We go to Idaho, we hunt in Colorado. Unfortunately, this year we're not going to make it. Obviously, the social distancing is a problem, but we travel with our two dogs, and we typically spend a couple of weeks exploring around the area, camping, going from fire to fire. We usually spend two, maybe 3 days on a fire if it's productive, and then move on. We also come back. We have a place in Reedsport, so we spend a lot of time there exploring the dunes. So that's fun. Now, when we start talking about morels here, here's the list of fires that we have visited in the last couple of years. If any of those are familiar to you, I don't know if you've noticed. You can raise your hand on the webinar. Go ahead and raise your hand if you have hunted a forest fire for burns before. I'm curious how many of you have done that. We got a lot of hands going up. A lot of you. Wow, you're filling my screen. Oh my gosh, stop. That's crazy. Awesome. So there's a lot of experience in the room, so to speak. I like talking about burns because morels are secret. Natural morels, nobody's going to share their spots with you, but burn morels, they change every year. They go from burn to burn, and it's not really a big secret. So it's a really fun mushroom as a mushroom hunter to talk about and share information about because you're not really giving away a secret spot. And people are surprised when you share it. Now, what we've been doing is we map burns, and we have on our website an ebook about it. And we got started mapping the burns because I would make maps so we could come out and hunt burns in Oregon, and discovered other people wanted my maps. So that's how I kind of got into that. And now we have, I don't know, 100 people that use our maps every year to find morels and share their stories with us. It's a lot of fun. Now, when we start talking about the morels themselves, I think there's some topics to kind of put out on the table here. First of all, morels are polymorphic. That means they're gonna look different, different colors, different sizes, different shapes. They're also very predictable. Morels will fruit at certain temperatures. They like certain humidity levels. They like certain elevations. They like certain trees. But while they're predictable, they also behave unpredictably. Now, I say this because one of the things that happens with morels and like teaching about burn morels, or people will be like, oh, I find them over here, or I find them there. And there's all these exceptions to the quote unquote rule. I don't want to talk about the exceptions today. I really want to kind of share our system of finding them. So I'll often be talking about, I think that's kind of a fringe idea, like it's not the norm. They certainly have a sense of irony there. You will know if you've been hunting for morels, you spend all day and then you find them next to your car. They're funny, funny creatures that way. They're very difficult to classify down to the species. They look so similar, and you have to really get to the microscope or DNA testing to drive down into the species level for a lot of these morels. We also consider them mycorrhizal. So that means, and there's some debate on this, of course, but they live with trees. They live in tree roots, tree bark, tree trunks, and that's where they hang out and have a relationship with a tree. And that's a really important thing if you want to successfully hunt burn morels or any morels, are to really understand trees. So these are all things we take for granted. That said, morels shop local. The trees change as you go around the country or go into different habitats. A morel that is a very strongly connected with a certain type of tree will be now strongly connected with a different type of tree. So as you kind of study online how people find morels, pay really close attention. That guy in Colorado or that person in Virginia, their information on morels is probably not relevant to you. So we like to talk about all these with the concept that we're after strategy, not serendipity. It's fun to find morels in odd places, but we want to be able to go and really be successful. And that's what I'm going to talk about today. So burn morels. I'm going to go to the kind of bottom idea of this, which is a lot of people find morels in a place that is burned and they call them burn morels. For our purposes, those are not burn morels. Those are morels that grow in a burnt and disturbed area. Burn morels have three important characteristics that we're talking about today. And they're right here in front of you. Number one, they're going to only grow in a conifer forest. Number two, they're going to only grow in the western U.S. and they're going to only grow after a fire. That's the only. All three of those situations have to exist to be a proper burn morel. Now, there's a tiny. If you look in the lower corner there, there's a little asterisk. Exceptions do exist, and I want to talk about them. Number one, they only grow in conifer forests. There has been a report. I'm aware of one. It's not really proven that they grew in a deciduous forest. That's not a strategy, that's serendipity. Number two, they only grow in the western U.S. That's going to be the Rockies and West. However, there are people in South Dakota who talk about finding them there in the Black Hills. I haven't worked to verify that. And there are 4 instances known to science that burn morels have been found in the East. And those, like in Michigan, I think Tennessee or North Carolina, 4 times they've been found. And again, that's pretty rare, although all 4 times they were found in pine forests. So that conifer connection did exist. But for all intents and purposes, if you're looking for burn morels, you're going to start in the Rocky Mountains and you're going to go west from there if you want to find them. Now, the burn morels themselves are also unique species. I have a list of 5 species here that you can look at. 5 specific Morchella species that will only show up after a burn. This is how they live. There is some debate on this, and this number has kind of changed over the years, and as the DNA and the nomenclature of these species has also been revised. There's a lot of funny references that will say there are 6 well-known burn morel species, but they don't actually tell you what the 6 are. I've done a lot of research, and I have a link down there if you're interested to the research that shows these are the 5 morels that you're going to find. And I also have the links to the exceptions for the 4 East Coast versions or findings of morels if you want to see those. However, the real question is like, okay, so these are burn morels. Why are they burn morels? What's going on here? And there's different theories. It appears that these morels live in the trees, in the roots, in the trunks, in the bark, wherever they live, associated with the trees. And when a fire comes through, it signals these mushrooms and they pop up in fruit. Otherwise, they are just hunkered down, in hiding, just living the good life until that happens. Why does a burn trigger it? There's theories. One theory is the composition of the soil changes with ash. Another theory is that the fire burns hot and kills stuff in the soil and creates a less competitive environment. That's a theory too. Another one is that the dead host, the tree, which has been killed or severely damaged by the fire, has inspired the mycelium to fruit because it knows that it's losing its host and it needs to spawn or die, or spawn and then die. I don't know if mushrooms spawn. I just like the word. So what's really going on here? My theory is that I find them in places where the soil doesn't necessarily have ash in it. So I don't know about the soil competition. I've never noticed that the level of the burn, like it needs to burn a certain hotness to kill competitors. I've never really seen that. In fact, if it burns too hot, it seems to cause damage. I think it lives in the tree. The tree starting to die. I think the mushroom may turn from mycorrhizal to kind of saprophobic right in that minute. And maybe it's consuming, not only inspired to fruit, but it's kind of actively consuming all that dead organic material in the soil that was formerly its host. So I don't know. It's a bit of a mystery. If anybody has any theories, feel free to push them right out there in the chat. Maybe there's another one, but that's my theory. So those are the 5 species. The best known one is that number 1 at the top, the Morchella tomentosa. That's the gray, the fuzzy foot is sometimes called, a big, fat, beefy morel. It's really heavy. It's a delightful morel that cooks up really nice in the pan with a huge mouthfeel. There's a picture of one right there. We get those near the end of the season, and they're prized. Okay, now in Oregon, let's take a look at the map and see what we got here. Here's a state map with the forests demarcated on it. And the way I look at it, let me get my cursor in here a little bit better so you can see it. If you give me just a minute, I am going to turn that on. And now you should be able to see my cursor in here, and we're going to look at the state. So over here on the coast, we have a coastal range, and we have forest along the coast. I've never hunted burn morels in this area, and I don't think many people do. It's not really known for them. Most of the burn morels are going to happen kind of here and to the east, especially even the eastern side of the Cascades are especially well known. And then that flows down here through Ochoco and up through, I guess these are called the Blue Mountains. This whole area is really nice, all the way down through the Central Forest, Mount Hood, Willamette, Deschutes. Those are all pretty kind of prime burn morel territory. This big area in the middle is very deserty, and it's not a lot of the right kind of trees, so we don't find them there. And this area down here is kind of interesting. Right down in the lower southwest corner of the state, there's a lot of nice territory. However, never really found many mushrooms there. Apparently there's something going on with the soil, that the soil composition down in here and in Northern California is different than the rest of the state. Curiously, there's also tan oaks, a different kind of habitat there as well. So it's kind of interesting that this area that looks so good, I don't think produces. I'd be curious if any of you want to throw any ideas in there in chat. I forget what the name of that soil is. Yeah, there is a town called Burns here. There's nothing highlighted there though. This map is also important because it shows the national forests, which are going to be our hunting grounds for these mushrooms. The other kind of thing going on with this map, and the problem is, compared to normal foraging, you mushroom hunt in your area, you have your favorite spots, you go check them out. With burn morels, it's different. You have to go find that burn. You have to locate it on a map. You have to decide whether you're going to go, whether it's good. Then you have to like get there and get into the burn. There's a lot of things to figure out here, and that's where the mapping becomes really critical. Because you are driving quite a distance. Now here's the good news. You can research burn morels from your armchair. When we're talking about, let's see, satellite maps, topographical maps, land use maps, and road maps. I'm going to talk about those now for about the next 20 minutes and how we're using maps to find the right kind of places. But here's the quick rundown. We're using satellites to look for trees. We're using topographical maps to get the right aspect, elevation, and steepness. We're using land use maps to make sure we're allowed to hunt there. And then we're using road maps to make sure we access it. So there's like the next 15, 20 minutes, we're going to kind of look in some maps and look at some burns. So I'm going to kind of look through the questions here. Oh dear, my question area has a scroll bar. I apologize. I didn't realize they were stacking up in here. So yeah, I think I'm going to be answering a lot of these questions as we go. Are burn morels a different mushroom than naturals? Absolutely, just like I talked about, they totally are. Morel hotspots in New England? No, we're not talking about that at all. Do you look for spring porcinis? Yes, stay tuned. We will look at that. How long will a burn be productive? It's most productive in the first year. If the weather is perfect, you can pick it the same year as the fire. That's unusual. It's usually best the year after the fire, and then for maybe second year and third year, you can pick these burns, and their production is going to go down. But you could also totally hit it, and you could have huge banner days in second year burns with ginormous numbers. We usually do first year burns though. You got some clear cutting. I don't think I want to talk about clear cutting. It's not something I know enough about. Soil temperatures, we'll get to that. So let's look at some maps. And map resources. First of all, you got to find the burns. There's the real problem is here, there's too many burns. There's millions of acres of burns a year. I mean, we measure them in millions of acres. That's a pretty big number. I think the challenge is not getting burn maps. The challenge is winnowing down all the burns so that you can kind of find where you're going to go. And on some of these, it can be daunting because they combine 10 years of burns onto a map, which means you got a map in front of you with, I don't know, hundreds of thousand burns to look at to figure out where you want to go next week. There's a lot of maps you can search on Google and get burn perimeters as well. So I'm going to pull over a quick map here just to show you. Pull that right over here. This is our maps here, and just to show you the 2020. Let's not look at that one yet. Let's just look at all the burns in Oregon in 2019. So these are ones we're going to hunt in 2020, And I've already gone through and I put them all on a map, and there's a lot of them. It's a challenge to find the right one. Now, if you happen to live near one and you're a local and you know the burn, that's awesome. You don't need this mapping technology. But for many of us, we're trying to, plan a weekend. We're trying to plan a 2 or 3 day trip even to hit just the right burn. So research is required to narrow this list down. So that's kind of the problem is finding the right burn, and it's caused because there's so many. I notice a lot of people are like, oh, there's free burn maps all over the internet, and I'm like, I mean, there's a lot of them, but you're gonna need to spend many hours combing through them, where some of these other paid versions are gonna be a lot quicker for you, I feel like. Okay, let's just see if we got any new questions coming here before I go to the next slide. Somebody asked to see the question queue. No, sorry, I only get to see the question queue. Burn morels in Western Washington, absolutely not along the coast. Same as here, you're going to be looking in the Cascade Mountains in that range, especially on the western side. But the eastern side, we've done very well on that as well over the years. We're going to talk about burn severity in a minute too. So let's look at the next one. Here's some elevation guidelines. So when we're looking at these maps, we're going to want to find the right elevations. And if you're at the wrong elevation, you're not going to find morels. So here's generally where we start. These can change by several weeks. If you have a long, cold spring, everything can be 2 or 3 weeks later. Likewise, if you have a warm, sunny spring, everything can be 2 weeks earlier. So there's almost a month swing. I know 2 years ago, burns were popping at lower elevations by almost like the 3rd week of March. And last year at the 3rd week of March, it was absolutely freezing. And then we had all that really hot weather. And it was really difficult on the burns. So this is my general guideline. So we often are hunting around Memorial Day weekend, and we are typically around that time, around 4,000 to 4,500 feet is where we often do a lot of our hunting in Oregon. But we have come earlier and later and explored different elevations for sure. Let's see. Okay, there's still a number of questions about second year burns. We'll try to hit those too. Somebody asked, am I using ArcGIS software with specific layers? Can I recommend or share? No, I'm building my own maps. The problem with ArcGIS is it's expensive. ArcGIS, Gaia GPS and Onyx both have burn layers with maps on them if you're really willing to wade through them. If you know how to use ArcGIS, I mean, you figure it out. It's a very complex software. I wouldn't recommend to a newbie by any means. Okay. Here's a pile of morels. This is kind of what's at stake when you have a nice day out there in the woods. I showed this picture here. I was showing you these elevation guidelines. These were picked August 13th, I believe, is the date on these. So last year we had a lot of snow. It was holding up in the high country pretty well. And this is in Colorado where we picked these in August, but I have a picture later on of some late season activity in Oregon as well. So the season can go on and on and on. If you get out there at the right time, you can find a lot of mushrooms. I'll tell you one thing, the burn morel hunters, they are typically out of the woods by July and August. There's not many people out there that time of year. They've moved on to other things. So it can be a really fun time to go. It also illustrates the problem of what do you do with all these mushrooms? Sandy, Sadib asked, are they, or do they taste better? Why do we hunt them? And I don't think they taste any better. I don't think they're any different than other morels. That said, I don't eat morels. I'm really allergic to them. So I don't really get to eat them, but I do cook a lot of them up. And it really is, I think, the fascination. It's the idea that you can go out into the woods and fill 5-gallon buckets and one after the another if you wanted to. It's not a question of kind of, can you get enough? It's a question of how many do you want to carry out of the woods typically when you hit it. The numbers are amazing. Okay, so there was the elevation. Now, within elevation, there's these mitigating factors that change things. We have north versus south and east versus west. So when you go into a burn, the south-facing slope is always much warmer and weeks ahead of a north-facing slope. And it will also pop off first in the spring if it has a little bit of a northern, or excuse me, a little bit of a southern exposure. East versus west are pretty similar to each other. West is a little bit warmer than east. One of our favorite things, my favorite thing is I like to find an eastern exposure. And it allows me with an eastern exposure, then with all the gullies and things, I've got northern and southern exposures in there. So with it on the east side, I've got a nice temperature range and some warmer and cooler spots as I kind of head through the eastern exposure, finding different kind of temperature zones, and the soil temperature can change dramatically. So when we talk about the elevation and when the season starts, it seems like it's the soil temperature that triggers these mushrooms to fruit. And when it starts getting in the really high 40s, really low 50s, that's when they come out. So one thing you can do, and I'm not really into this, you can carry around a meat thermometer, you can poke it into the soil, preferably the same depth, the same time of day, and start getting a sense. And it's kind of fun to do. I've just found that it's not always the most reliable way to determine if the mushrooms are there or not. It's a rough indicator. Nothing beats walking through the forest and looking. I also like to find indicators in the forest. There might be little orange cups. There might be flowers. But really, I feel like it's a matter of just finding them in the forest in the right elevation zone that they're going to be growing in. And it's not uncommon for them to have a couple 100 feet elevation range where they're really popping off. And if you go above that, maybe they haven't started yet. And if you go below it, they might be a little bit old. Now, mitigate this even more, we have this idea of multiple flushes. And if the conditions are right, the mushrooms will grow in a single location for weeks and weeks and weeks with different flushes as they come up. And you might be able to catch it that way. We normally travel around and hit a burn, and we stay for 2 days, and we're looking for the first flush. We're looking for the best mushrooms. Last year, we had the opportunity to really sit on a burn for weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks and visit it over and over. And it was surprising how good those second, third, and fourth flushes were when the weather conditions were right. So I really like that. If the weather is right, it opens up a lot of the mountain for you for finding mushrooms. We had a follow-up question there. The soil temperature, to repeat that, is about 50 degrees. So normally when I find a morel, like the first morels on the spot, and I slide the meat thermometer in there to see what it says, it's going to say 49 to 53. That's normal. Now you might find a 47, you might find a 58. There's a pretty good range there. There's a 4 or 5 degrees, and if you wait later in the day, the temperature goes up a few degrees too. So there's a lot of factors, but around the low 50s seem to be a good sweet spot to look for. Okay, let me just see if I've got any more questions here before I push on. One question Devin asked, are these elevation guidelines applicable to all Western states or Oregon specifically? They're Oregon specific. Washington is very similar. Colorado, we start at 8,000, maybe around Memorial Day, maybe a little later, and we're going to go up to 10 or 11,000 feet. So our elevations are different. So everywhere is different in terms of those starting elevations. We have a question about trees. I will get to that. Thank you. Preserving them. I'll talk a little bit about that. Siv, I pronounced your name wrong. Hi, Siv. Sorry about that. Oh, do I have a picture of orange cups? I don't. I'm sorry. I didn't prepare that. Maybe if I get a minute here, I'll pull one up. Somebody asked about how about using a pyrometer. I'm not really sure what that is. Maybe you should put that in here. I'm curious what a pyrometer is. It sounds like it measures fire. Is there a number of days to wait for a flush after a good rain? We're going to talk about that. Let's talk about that now. So morels, burn morels are highly rain sensitive. We have really learned the hard way that their Mother Nature dictates their life. And you can hunt all day, and if it's too dry or too cold, you're not going to find them, or if you're in the wrong place. Working harder is not the solution. The solution is waiting for rain or looking at a rain map and going and finding a wetter environment. Now, how long does it take? If they're queued up and ready, if the weather's been nice and it's not really dry and they're ready to pop, they're gonna start growing about 24 hours after the rain, and certainly 48 hours after the rain, they're gonna be like in really good shape and ready to pick and big and beautiful. If you get a big heavy rain, a cold rain, that like an inch of rain, that will often set them back like 2, 3, maybe 4 days, because I think what happens is it drops the soil temperature like boom, 10 degrees with all that cold water permeating. However, from day, say, 4 to day 7 or day 8, the mushrooms can go bananas after a big rain like that, and often grow in weird places where the rain has really gotten into and seem to have encouraged them. So I like the big rain, as long as I'm not trying to hunt within a day or two of the big rain. Okay. Somebody asked, what does an old morel look like as compared to a fresh one? That's a great question. You don't want old morels. So look, all these pictures I'm showing you are pretty fresh. They're beautiful morels. You can see the one on here. This is a tomentosa, just a little baby one, really nice. When we pick the morels, usually the stems turn darker and they get crumbly. I feel like the age of the morel is not so important as the integrity of it. When you pick it, is it turning crumbly, which it will still typically tastes pretty good. Give it a smell. That's ultimately, if it doesn't smell right or it's kind of crumbling in our hands and isn't going to keep its integrity, it's probably too old. And you can tell often by looking, because the stems turn darker over time. And so usually the stem colors, like as you're looking at a bunch of morels, maybe 2 flushes together, you'll be going for the white stems and leaving the dark stems, because the dark ones might be 8 or 10 days old. Usually within 2 weeks they're gone though. It's about as long as they last if conditions are right. And if conditions are right, they seem to keep growing. They get pretty big. If conditions are not right, especially if it gets dry again, it seems like they stop and then they never start again. So often if we had a little bit of rain, just enough to kind of get them to start, but not enough to really be successful, you'll find a lot of little kind of dried out morels. And once they've stopped growing and they're little, they never get bigger again, unfortunately. At least that's my experience. So the second and third flushes can be super productive way to mitigate your elevation issues if you need to, and search lower elevation areas. And then late in the year, you may want to go for the late gray flush if you can. Those are the last ones to come up. Those are these, and they're fun. So we're getting back to maps a little bit. Let me just make sure the other thing about the north I had a note to say here is very important. The north holds a lot more water. And in my experience in Oregon, usually the biggest issue is you're fighting the moisture levels in the forest, because wherever you're going, it just hasn't rained enough. And you know what it's like. You've had a couple weeks of dry weather. Somebody asked if the small stunted ones bad to eat. No, they taste great. They're just small. Somebody else said check for worms. I don't think so. We've never found worms in broom morels in Oregon. That's kind of an eastern phenomenon. Very rare. We do find some other little bugs. I got some fun pictures of later. But the northern side, northern slopes, when it's dry, are the place to be, especially if you can find seeps in them, or maybe get up higher where the the snow melt is creating water. Look for little green areas. And they also grow in the holes. So when the forest burns, the tree burns all the way down and the roots burn, and it creates these like giant holes down in the ground. And if you look down in those when it's dry, you will find morels in there. So even when it's dry, you can still salvage a couple gallons of morels by strictly looking for northern areas, looking for wet areas, and looking in all the holes you walk by, looking under the logs. People are asking, are these slides going to be available later for reference? No, they're not. However, we are going to post this video on YouTube afterwards, and the link for the webinar will continue to work, and you can go watch it again also right here in Zoom if you want. That link will work for quite a while. Okay, here's our checklist. So you're getting ready to go. You got to pay attention to a few things. Number one is you want to hunt in a national forest. I believe in Oregon you can't hunt in a state forest. Maybe I'm wrong about that. Maybe that's Colorado. There's not that many. anyways, and maybe you can in Oregon. However, you cannot hunt in a wilderness area, wilderness designated. I think when you're in a wilderness area, you can pick mushrooms, but you have to eat them while you're there. You can't bring them out as a harvest, and you can't hunt on Indian reservations. And then there's timberland. It's kind of the trickiest thing on private property that you're going to want to watch out for. So when you're looking at maps, you need a map that shows private property, national or U.S. Forest Service, BLM, national parks, things like that, because you don't want to accidentally hunt in a national park. The other thing you're going to want to look for, and we're going to start looking at here, is accessibility. Can you get to the burn? We're going to look at the size and elevation varieties of fires. I talk about destination fires. So there's big fires and small fires. And we definitely like the big fires that have a lot of territory, a lot of elevation range. You can get into them and you can kind of find the mushrooms often in the first hour. Maybe it's the first half day. You try different areas. And then once you know the elevation they're at, that's pretty consistent. And you can go to smaller burns, maybe a 20 or 50 or 500 acre burn, where I don't usually go to those until I'm pretty confident that the weather's right and I know the elevations, because there's not a lot of variety in a small burn, where the destination burn will be big and you'll see other pickers in it and you'll see where they're parking, which is a good way to often find where the mushrooms are. When you see, the commercial guys out picking, pay attention to where they're at generally elevation wise. And the other thing we're going to look for is heavy tree structure, which is vital. So let's look at some maps. Well, I'll check the questions first here. Why is it called a gray flush? Catherine Creech asked that one. Catherine, it's because those tomentosa, Morchella tomentosa, are black and then they turn gray. They're unusual color. So one of their nicknames are just grays. Derek, hey Derek, you asked, are there any experiences picking prescribed burns? No, I don't have much experience. We've done a few and been really disappointed. So a prescribed burn is different. And I think what happens is the prescribed burn is controlled and it doesn't do enough damage. I mean, really you need like carnage. You need death of trees and for the burn morels to come out. And unless the prescribed burn gets away from people, usually the degree of damage isn't great enough for good picking. Now you're going to find some here and there, but we've never been able to find the same numbers. So we don't usually go to the prescribed burns because they don't quite do the job. Okay, I think we're doing good on questions. I did answer what a destination fire was just now. It's the one that we pick because it's big and has a lot of variety and we know we're going to find mushrooms in it. And then from there, we can go look for smaller fires. Okay, so let's look at a map here. Here's a map of a satellite map. This is the Desolation Fire, which was east of Prineville, I think is how you say it, in the, I think that's Ochako Forest, and it looked really good. I'm not going to show the topo map here, but there's over on the left, there's roads coming up into here. And this was the first burn we hit 2 years ago, I think. We drove up into here and it was pretty tough hunting. We probably got a gallon and maybe 2 hours and looking around, and it's just not really enough to get us excited and stick around. And the reality is, if you look at this picture, you can see the problem. It's the trees. You can see all the space between the trees. And this burn really felt like a prescribed burn. When you drove up this road and we drove and like up in here, I was like trying to get to this spot where it looked like there were heavier trees. They just weren't burnt. They weren't dead enough. And I think because there was so much space between the trees, the fire kind of ran along the ground and it just didn't do enough. And there weren't enough big trees. So that's the lesson of this when you're looking on satellite. This is probably not quite enough tree coverage, not compared to what you're looking for. Now, the other thing we're looking for in here are this kind of mixed conifer forest, whether that would be, grand firs, Doug firs, spruces all mixed in, some pine trees. The mixed forest seems to be the best. They will grow, it seems like, with all those trees, though, in different habitats. Now, this fire was a much better pick. If you look at it, you can see the trees in here are pretty thick in this whole area. Now this was not a quote unquote destination fire. This was more of a boutique fire. Let me pop over to the next screen and show you. And this is the East Morey fire, which actually is also down by Prineville too. And we came in, we first saw it's U.S. Forest Service, so it's legal to pick. Here's a road running right through it. Man, it doesn't get any better than that. And it's pretty flat and walkable. Let me go back and you can see it here again. You can see that kind of lake over here. It wasn't really a lake. It was more like a dried up pond. There we go. But super easy to access. And the way we looked at it was, okay, this is 4,600 feet, which was our elevation zone. That's what we knew we wanted. We figured we could kind of park in here and walk down these nice flat areas and kind of get down into here and check it out. It's got some other good things going for it too. First of all, we like flat areas. They're a lot easier to hunt. But it also has northern exposures all through this area right here. So there's a lot of different, and like this little creek bed right here has south, west, and northeast exposure. So there was a lot of actual variety in this little burn, even though it was only a total change of 500 feet in elevation. So to go back, here's what it looked like. Now, when we got there, it was like super dry. And it was tough hunting, and we didn't do too well in here. What we ended up finding out was in this little creek flowed down into here, and we were able to find them in these northern edges. We found some creeks and springs, and we were able to find little pockets of morels in this case because it was too dry. But otherwise, a really nice looking on a map. This has everything. It's legal to pick. It's got easy access. It's got easy walking. And it's got lots of trees, and it's got northern exposures as well as about a 500 range in elevation with some south and east and west exposures, so we could try some different aspects there to see if we could find them. It was the East Morey fire. Now let's look at the next one. This one. Here's an example. It might be a good fire, and it's got a lot going for it. There's a campground right here. This is called the Indian Creek fire, I think, Indian Crossing fire, maybe because of that campground. But oh my gosh, if you came to this fire and you showed up there, you got access, right? And it's legal to hunt. But look at that hillside, you guys. That is first of all, that is a south-facing hillside, so it's going to be beat by the sun. And it's just too steep to work. Now, by the way, mushrooms, morels love steep areas. You're going to find them in any steep terrain. One of my tips later on is if you're in a really competitive environment, there's other people picking, go to the steeps. People often don't pick them. They're harder, way harder to pick. I dare say exhausting. But if they haven't been picked, they hold as many mushrooms as the flat areas. They're just less fun to pick. So this might be a good chance, looking at this, the problem with this map. Let's just pop over now, and I'm going to pull over another map for us to look at. So this is what I use. This is the modern Forager map. So what I've got here is I showed you 10 minutes ago a map of all the burns, and there were so many. I went through and I removed all the burns that were in Indian reservations, that were not on public huntable land, I removed them if they were in wilderness. I removed them if they also were just in these big dry treeless areas. So these basically all have something in common. They all have trees, and you can get to them and pick them. Richard said he was always taught southern facing mountains were best. Is that incorrect? I hate to say it's incorrect, but I think I'm going to say it's incorrect. South facing really works when it's cold. But it seems like the bigger problem with morels are the dry too. And it just, south doesn't seem to do as well for us. Although we certainly have found them there, and we will look there. But we almost always kind of slip over into the north and the east and do better. And somebody said our burn morel is specific to each conifer species. Has replanting of Doug firs over the last 100 years changed the distribution? I don't know. I haven't been picking that long. We usually don't pick those monoculture forests either. We're looking for mixed conifers, and it doesn't seem to matter that it's had some timbering activity and some tree planting, as long as it's not been turned into a kind of a single monoculture forest. And is there one conifer that's better than the other? I struggle with that. It might be firs, it might be spruce, it might be pines. No, people find them in cedar. I just look for mixed, healthy conifer forests that have burned. So here they all are, and I have a filter up here. And what I do is I divide these. So I want to look at just the top burns in the state. Look, there's a lot of burns here, and you can look at the Bs and the Cs if you want. I don't want to waste time on them. If I'm driving by one and it's off the side of the road, I might look at one. But these are the burns after I narrowed it down this year that we have that are good. Now, last year there were way more burns. It was a really good fire year in Oregon last summer. There weren't too many burns, fires that went out of control. Now the situation means this year there's not as many fires. And I'll take a little aside here, and this might be an opportunity. Last year there were a lot of fires, and we hunted them, and hunters all over, and you guys probably had this experience. It was a difficult year in the burns. They were just not going off between the we had that really cold spring going into March, and then about March 31st, the sun came out, it got really hot, and it didn't rain for a month. And it seemed like April rolled around and it was super dry, and then it got really cold and rainy. It just was not a good environment, and a lot of these burns didn't go off. And the theory is if they didn't go off the first year, the second year will become the first year. So there's a good chance that if you look at last year's burns, you might do really well this year. So maybe this map of just this year, maybe you want to expand and look at last year's and visit a few of those. I know we'll be doing that here. Now this map here, we've got a couple options. I can pop it onto terrain view and see a little more like that. I can zoom in, and I can see the names of the burns. That we have them all right here. Well, curiously, when I organize them with letters like A. I have A+ at the bottom. That's probably the best burn I found in the state this year, the HK complex. And I put the elevations in here because this is really important. Because if you're looking to go out now, you're going to want to pick the lowest elevation you can here. Maybe this MP that starts at 900. Here's Bunker Creek at 2,500. Here's a 1,500 feet. These are the ones you probably, if you're really anxious to go, you're going to want to hit first. Whereas some of these others with the higher ranges, you're going to be able to pick these into well through May and into early June, I'm sure. And this one looks pretty good. I'll pop it out. I've kind of described what I see here. I got 2,600 acres of easy road access. So that's really nice. And there's more information in here if you want to read about the fire. But what I do is I zoom in on this fire. So let's zoom in and take a look at it. Make this go away. Oops. Okay. So usually what I'm doing here is I'm going to pop in next, and I see all the roads. They look good, easy access. And I'm going to pop into satellite. And I got mixed feelings about this one. There's a lot of brown in here. There's a lot of treeless areas, but look at all these creeks running through here with pretty heavy tree cover up in here, pretty heavy tree cover. I kind of like most of the creeks run north-south. So that means you're going to have a lot of east and west facing slopes. There's a lot of trees right here. There's some really thick trees through here. So looking at this burn and coming back to the map, you probably can kind of figure out where you're going to drive and park in here. Now, the next thing I always want to look at is the Forest Service map. Now, here's why. This burn looks pretty good, but in many U.S. Forest Service areas, the Google Maps are not accurate. The roads they have are a fraction of the roads that are there. They don't seem to be labeled the same as when you're driving down the road. The labeling doesn't match the Forest Service labeling in here. They don't show gates often. I don't know, there's just not a lot of, I don't rely on this Google map. I've had problems with it, not getting to where I need to be. So I like to use this Forest Service map to plan my routes, to see the names of the roads, and then I can look in here too, and as I get in here, I can remember like, oh, this area looked good and it's flat, and you can zoom in and look at the elevation right there and kind of see, and maybe you want to pop back over and take a look at the trees in there, plan how you might get there. So that's a nice, I also have the geological USGS maps, which are very similar. Sometimes they have a little more up-to-date information in them. You can see they're very similar though, but I will reference both of them occasionally. There's creeks running through here, so if it's dry, you might do that. So this is the kind of how I map these out when I'm trying to locate these burns. I'm I'm using all of these layers to determine if it meets my 6 criteria. All right, we got a few other map comments in here too. Milli is local. Yep, Milli was a big burn. Boy, we really picked that hard. I guess 2 years ago. It was a really nice burn. It says, somebody said all U.S. Forest Service is currently closed to the public. Fines have been implemented. I'm sorry, I don't live in Oregon. I don't know what your local rules are. You definitely want to pay attention to that. I try to kind of leave that out of here, like what the kind of rules are. I'm assuming that as we go through May and June, the rules will be changing, and you'll have to just behave appropriately with your kind of coronavirus hunting etiquette. Let's see what other questions we have in here. Can you speak of junipers? Alan asked that question. Now, I've never really found them in the junipers. You know, there might be a juniper bush in a mixed forest, and that's hard to say, but no, we don't really, I've never hunted junipers. I'm not saying they're not there though. I mean, they grow near cedars too, which we've never really been in a cedar forest and hunted, but certainly if we saw one, we would check it out. I'd say for the junipers, Alan, you may have to figure that out. If you know they grow there, pop it in here and tell me. Okay, there's some chat going on. If you want to know about the Forest Service rules, there's people talking about it in there. I'm going to let that go, let you guys kind of talks amongst yourselves on that. Okay, I got a few more kind of random map tips to plug in here. Okay, so these are helpful tips I think that we use. We use Gaia GPS when we're in the field on our iPhones or Androids to map ourselves. I've used a lot of different GPS systems. Onyx is another very popular one. I like Gaia because it offers me more states for the price. But Gaia has incredible property ownership information. So if you need to know who owns a property, probably Onyx is better, but whatever, they're about the same. What they do that's cool though is you can download them on all these maps onto your phone, and then you can save it so that it's downloaded offline. So when you're out in the woods and there's no cell phone service, you'll have all of your maps right in front of you. You can sync it with your hunting buddies. So, you know, my wife and I, we both have the same map. She has hers, I have mine, and they actually sync together and we can see what each other did. That works really well. I'm a big fan of that technology. I print paper maps too. I think you saw that up here. Right here are some paper maps. We do this less now as the kind of the online mapping is getting better, but I love to print paper maps. I buy a waterproof paper. You can buy a sheath of it on Amazon. It's not very much. Maps print up on these. They last a long time. I do this a lot too with some of my mapping software. It's a little more advanced, but I drop color zones on there. So I know this is the zone I'm looking for mushrooms, and anything blue is high and anything red is low, and I'm going to be looking for maybe in the middle of that. It helps me find elevations quickly when I color code my maps. So I do that a lot. But printing maps works great when you're in the field. You can also take your paper maps and draw fire perimeters on them. That's what we did the first year, and it saved our bacon to have the state gazetteer with all the maps that I drew into it. That works well. And also, you'll want to determine where to buy your permit. We're going to talk about that in a minute with your maps. That's an important thing you'll need to figure out. And so you can go buy your permit. Again, we'll talk about that. But the last bullet point, these are all hard-learned lessons, by the way. The last bullet point for sure, go look at the U.S. Forest Service website. They're usually pretty good, in our experience, at telling you when places are closed. And it's very common for different burns to be closed. If you've been, live near Portland, you know that they shut down anything near Portland to keep mushroom hunters out, it seems like. We certainly checked that big burn out there that was Eagle something or other. We checked that out 2 years ago, but you couldn't hunt in it. So check for the closures, and they'll usually be pretty accurate on the Forest Service site. They don't seem to have some of the other things you want on their site, but they will tell you when things are closed, which is partly ironic, but it's also very helpful. Let's see what other questions we got in here. Alan says, how do you find mixed conifers on maps? Alan, that's a great question. You study them real close. I zoom in a lot and I look I get, especially in this Google satellite maps tend to be the best, but I might look at Bing too, if I need to, or some other sources. Google Earth as well has some different maps. And if you zoom in, and especially if you kind of know the forest, you start to get a sense. You can kind of tell that's a pine forest. You can kind of tell if they're the right kind of forest or not. Somehow it's just, you just keep looking, and as you go and look at maps and then look at where you are, you'll start to recognize, oh, these are deciduous trees and these are conifers in the maps. Yeah, Sandra's got a great question. Is there a reason the coastal forests aren't as productive? I don't know why. I mean, my theory, Sandra, so this is just theory. I'm not a mycologist. I think these burn morels, these species, live in the trees, and they live there for decades until the forest burns. And I just think in the coastal area, I don't think they live in those trees. There's something about the habitat or maybe the types of trees. I think you'll find pockets of them in coastal forests when it burns. You might find little spots that have them, but they're just not like widespread and living in the forest waiting for a burn so they fruit. So I think it's just a matter of those species are literally not in the ground and in the trees in those areas. And I'm sure that obviously the habitat is so different along the coast between the moisture and the trees and the fauna that is also there, the flora and the fauna. It's a totally different environment. People do find them though. I think if you want to find them though, you best head west. You best head east and get into those good ranges. Okay, good. Let's see if we've got any more questions. It came up again. So the whole first year, second year burn question is like the #1 question people ask. If you randomly sample 10 burns, it's going to look like a bell curve. I think you're going to, 1 or 2 of them, you're not going to get much. 2 of them, you're going to just fill with hundreds of pounds. And the other 6 are going to be anywhere from a lot to enough to keep you satisfied. I think what happens in the second year is that all shifts. And now 1 out of 10 is going to be huge. 4 out of 10 is going to be nothing. And you're still going to have 4 or 5 in the middle that are going to produce some, but not as many. But there's a chance you could totally hit it and just go huge and find a lot. That also happens. So I would just say from a strategy standpoint, the odds of you finding a full bucket are probably cut in half at a second year burn. However, they're around. They're nice because nobody else is hunting them. You can have the whole place to yourself, and you might find an amazing flush and do great. But all things being equal, you're going to find more mushrooms in a first year burn on average. Chris, I already gave information on where to find fire perimeters. I gave a couple links. Somebody wants to put in a chat and tell Chris what those links were: Onyx, Gaia, Modern Forager, and you can Google it as well. There's other free resources. Do naturals and burns occupy the same zones? Great question. That's from anonymous attendee. Hi, anonymous. Yes, they do, but they don't fruit at the same time. So when you're in a burn, you're not going to find naturals generally. You may find a few ones here and there, but they, for some reason after the burn, they boom, they settle down and they let all the burn morels have their day. By year 3 and 4, I think if you go into older burns, you'll find naturals that are responding to that disturbance zone and like it. But you don't find many naturals in a burn. And when you do, they make sense. You're like, oh, here's a little pocket over here with some trees that didn't burn and it's pretty green, and you're going to find naturals in there most likely. You might find porcinis too, which we're going to talk about in a minute. Do the burn morels grow better in Oregon than Washington? Yikes. I don't know. Soil disturbance and logging as alternatives to fires. I'm just going to stick with burn morels today, not the disturbance morels. It's such a different topic. We're kind of moving on here, getting close to it. You know, we've done our scouting. Everything has been armchair up to this minute. We've done all this already. I've mapped all the burns. I've picked my favorites. I know where I'm going to go. I've done that kind of armchair research. So when do you go? Well, you're going to want to try to pick when it's rain and warm. And if you watch the weather, you will have a much higher success rate. Fighting Mother Nature is very frustrating with morels. I do have a cool link here. Maybe somebody could pop it into the chat group. That might help everybody out. And you can search for it if you just search for modern forager precipitation maps. I've got a couple of online websites that do really nice mapping, and not just like Weather Underground is going to show you radar. The kind of mapping I want is twofold. I want to see the whole state, and I want to see in the last week how much rain has fallen and where. I want to see like everything. And then I want to be able to determine where the rain is, because you might be sitting in Portland and like, okay, I got a 4-day weekend coming up. Where am I going to go? And it's surprising. There will be a giant rainstorm over in the Blue Mountains where an inch fell, where in other parts of the state there's not much rain. And you're going to want to follow it. We had a year 3 years ago where we picked up and left Bend area. I think we were down near Sisters hunting a fire and it was dry. We picked up and left and drove all the way over to, gosh, halfway to Baker City almost, because it rained hard over there. And we made out like bandits. We picked all the mushrooms we wanted. So follow that rain is a good way to go. Of course, you can just go pick too. Sometimes you just need to get out in the woods, even if you're not finding massive amounts. Leanne Caspi said, is Gaia best for delineating public versus private? I believe Gaia and Onyx have the same capability for delineating the two. On Gaia, there's a layer called land use or something, and it delineates BLM, state, private, native, park service, all that stuff. And I always have that layer open, and you know, often you're driving up a road and you'll go from public, you'll go from Forest Service to BLM to private within a mile, and it's good to know where you can hunt. Both maps have that delineation in it. Do you find the morels grow bigger west of Cascades? I don't know. I've never really found anywhere where like they grow bigger. I think it just depends on the weather. When we talk about the first year, yeah, we're talking about fires happen in the summer, and the first year burns are the next year. So they could happen in June, or they could happen in August or September of 2019. We're going to hunt those in 2020. And again, very occasionally, if you have a really warm snap in October, you might get fire morels popping up in the fall, which is crazy. Do I have elevation guidelines for naturals? No, I will say though that I feel like naturals come up right before the burns. So I feel like maybe the naturals pop a little bit ahead of the burns, but I don't know if that's the case. I don't have elevation guidelines for naturals. I guess the answer is no. But when I do find naturals around the burns, it seems like they're often old naturals. So there's that. Oh my gosh, Mark Conway, the scientific name for orange cups. Kristen, can you look that up and pop that into the chat? And if there's a way, maybe can we put pictures in the chat? Might be a good way to get a burn morel up there. Otherwise, or an orange cup. Otherwise, Kristen, maybe you could email me a quick picture of an orange cup and I'll pop it up here. Orange cups are beautiful. And there are a few species that grow along with the burn morels and are excellent indicators. We like to see orange cups. Often the orange cups will pop up profusely, the small ones, right before the burn. So if you see lots of little orange cups, you might be just a little bit too early. You might not be, but you might be. The other thing are we see verpas. False morels often come up before the burn. So if we see those, usually that means we need to go lower. Somebody asked again about Washington this year. Yeah, Jane says your website seems to say nothing of interest in Washington this year. Yeah, there's nothing. There's like hardly any burns. I think you're going to be looking at second-year burns. There's some fabulous second-year burns, especially in the northern part up near the Canadian border. There's just one after another stacked along the Canadian border from 2 years ago. I'd say in Washington, it's going to be a year when a lot of people are going to, and Oregon, a lot of people are going to learn whether second year burns work. And I predict they're going to say they work great if we get good weather. If it's like the last couple of weeks, I think people are going to be disappointed. Okay, so that's when you should leave your house. When you arrive at the burn, So now we're kind of really moving on. We're going to talk about what happens when you get there. When you hunt for naturals, often people, not everybody, but a lot of people say hunt slow, slow down. Slow down. You stop and look. We do not do that for burns. For burns, we walk fast. We move through a forest as quick as we can. We're covering ground. We're looking to, you know, especially when we're trying to figure out where they are. We're trying to walk up a creek, one side of it. So we get a western exposure, walk up 300, 400, 500 feet in elevation, cross and come down the other side. And we've, you know, looking for that zone. If we don't find it there, maybe we'll go higher, maybe we'll go lower, maybe we'll go to another area, because burn morels are a little patchy. They will often grow in one area, and then over here they'll not grow, but over here they'll grow. So you do want to cover a lot of ground. And the reason is too, is there's so many, they're pretty easy to spot. I mean, they're not like, you know, they're still morels that can be hard to spot, but when there's hundreds of them and you're walking fast, you're going to definitely be spotting burn morels. So we do that. We usually pick a couple of pre-planned areas in a burn. You know, we'll get on a map. We're going to go here, here, and here. That will purposefully test different elevations and aspects. So we almost always have like the first day planned out when we land in a burn. Like here's 4 spots we're going to go look at. Now we may see a bunch of cars in one area and say, oh, that must be close to the elevation. Or maybe we'll find them right away. Honestly, more often than not, we find them the first or second spot, and we don't have to keep looking too hard. Even in competitive environments, though, where there's other cars, you know, you walk through a forest and pick the burn morels, you turn around and come back the same way, you pick still a lot on the way back. They're easy to miss. So I don't worry too much about other commercial pickers. You know, if 2 or 3 or 4 people have been through one area, it gets pretty well picked. So when you get to the burn, look at this picture here. This is probably an example of what we don't want to pick. Now, this is not what I would call a moonscape. A moonscape, sometimes that burns down, there's nothing but black, like toothpicks sticking up out of the ground, and it's sun-drenched, and unless the conditions are absolutely perfect, we won't find them here. And unless they're really perfect, you're not going to find them here either. It's just too sunny. Now, you know, if they're perfect, you'll find them there. Normally, though, when we get to this burn, we turned around, and I thought I had the picture behind my back. I didn't. This looks a little better. Now, what you can't see, these trees are a little closer. It's a lot shadier in here. And back in the woods back here, do you see all these trees with dead pine needles or fir needles, whatever they are, on them? That creates a lot of shade. Usually the ground is brown like this, where the needles have fallen. They hold a lot of moisture, I think. And that's usually the place we're looking for first. So when we're looking to find the morels, we're always looking for this. We're looking for the deepest, the heaviest structure. There's another one. We're going to want to be walking down this trail and looking like down underneath these trees, you know, when we're trying to locate it. That's where they come out first, and that's where they're going to be most abundant. Now, as the conditions are just right, they will start popping out everywhere, and they're even easier to find. But sometimes if they're, you know, that's not just right, you're going to want to really focus on structure. You're going to be down on your hands and knees. You're going to be down in these shady spots. Look for dead pine needles in the air, and look for brown ones on the ground. And that's going to be the best spot to look at. All right, now check this out. This is a burn we walked into. This is actually the Milli burn. You guys have been talking about this a little bit on chat. Let me see if any questions before I show this. How many days after a rain? We kind of already hit that. 2 days unless it's colder. Do false morels precede natural morels? Yes. Safety, we're going to talk about in a minute. Gyrometra in the area, are they an indicator mushroom? I'm going to say no. I mean, we find them, and I think they pop up a little bit earlier than burns, but they don't grow in the burn. So when we find the gyrometras, it's typically when we're walking on a trail to a burn or on the side of the road before the burn. We usually don't find them in the burn. In fact, I'm going to say we never find them in the burn. So are they a good indicator? I mean, yeah, if we're seeing them, I feel like we're close. Maybe I'll drop a little bit lower elevation and look though. Under logs, absolutely, especially if it's hot. I love it under there. So here we walked in this trail. We parked right here. And you can see this is my track. And we walked up here and we started finding them. So you can see circling around, circling every little hitch in here as I'm picking, I'm sure. We head up in elevation, and this is, as you see that the topo lines on here. We got up to here and I stopped. I dropped a pin on my Gaia GPS, and we turned around and came back down and moved pretty straight, and then started looking again, and then really started finding them again. Now, why did I drop a pin there? And why did I stop? Well, as we were going up in elevation, we were at the top edge of the flush. When we got up to here, and this is a northeast facing slope, when we got up to there, the mushrooms got really small and fresh. They were too little. So we turned around, and even just this distance, they were bigger down here. And down on the other side of the road, we found out they were all through here in these deep bushes. We were really finding them in like this weird heavy cover where like you'd get into a bush and there'd be 100 of them. It was pretty cool. We picked a basket full, and it was like 2 hours. I don't know, 2.5 hours might have been, maybe 3. I don't know, it was a couple hours. We're like, we'll cut it down. We head back to our campground. We were in Milli, the burn, and camping right there in the burn, which was awesome. We were only 10 minutes away from this spot. Got back, and we came back that evening. And that's where we did this second one, and we went really slow and walked up in here and picked this whole area. And this is 3 trips right here. One, and there's a second one here, and there's another one where we kind of worked along the edges of the roads. And each time we filled our basket, it probably took, 2.5, 3 hours to fill our basket at that point. But I want to point out, we scouted this, we drove this road. We stopped right here because as we were driving this road, it had been burned pretty good, and it was just sunny and open. When we got to here, we started seeing thick trees, and that's why we stopped right here and headed up into them. And that was really the secret to this burn, to finding a lot of them. It worked pretty well. Now, this is a great scene to see in a burn, a porcini popping up. It's rare that they're in the burn like this. Usually they're in the unburned areas right outside the burn, but it's a fun mushroom if you keep your eye out. We hunted for years and never found them. We never looked. We didn't really even know they were there. And maybe 3 years ago, we saw this weird guy walking in the woods. He was out of it. He was picking these things. We're like, what is that? That's a porcini. Oh my gosh. And now we're often paying attention in the kind of logging trails and burns and kind of in the porcini territory. And we often find a nice bag of porcinis when we're out looking for morels too, which is a bonus. Yes, that is Boletus rex varus, spring porcini. And this one though, this is different. If you see it, this isn't a controlled burn, I believe, that we were walking through. And it had even burned recently. It was still a little smoky. How many miles do you walk in a day of hunting? Ira asked. 6, I would say. We try to find places where we can walk less than a mile and start hunting. If you walk a mile, you'll leave 80% of the people behind. We find that after about 6 miles, we get pretty tired, and we're not effective. So we usually probably hunt 6 miles. And that's 3 or 4 hours of hunting at least. A couple other random tips here. I already mentioned spring porcinis. We talked to competitive areas. Go to steep hillsides or where you can find them, and also super dense brush. Often it's worth kind of looking at a giant clump of brush up there and actually rooting around it a little bit and seeing what you see. Hunt where there's no parking nearby. So we found this in the Milli. We drove in and we got to this big intersection, and it had a big parking area and a campsite that nobody was in. We had the entire campground to ourselves. And we were there 3 nights. And it was easy to see everybody drove into this fire. And it was kind of funny that the Volvos and the Subarus, they drove in, and there was that intersection and parking, and everybody parked there. And they got out and they hunted for 45 minutes. I don't think they found any because everybody got out there and hunted. We walked around the area, and it had been picked pretty clean. But if you drove further up the road, there were these areas where you just couldn't park. The road didn't have pull-offs, and often that's going to be the best place. Is not necessarily where there's not easy parking nearby. I can tell you one thing, the commercial guys did not park in that parking lot of that three-way intersection with the campground nearby and go hunting. They drove right past that thing and kept going up into the woods to find a quieter spot. So I don't know that it's necessarily that you got to get away from people, but I know one little secret is if you can find a stretch of road where there is no parking, try to hunt that. It's not the road that's the problem, it's the parking. Also, hiking a few miles if you need to. Like I say, we try to limit it to a mile, but we'll go further if we need to. That always pays off. Always. There's rarely people when you walk a few miles. Know your wilderness boundaries if you are in a wilderness area, so you don't accidentally swing into it. Yeah, Vicky, 6 mile round trip. Yeah, that's about what it usually shows. Now, here's the funny thing about the 6 miles. I use my little Gaia GPS to measure my mileage. I also have a nice Garmin unit I used, which always showed more mileage when I was mushroom hunting. Because what happens is when you mushroom hunt, you're spending a lot of time circling around, going back and forth, and the phone is not quite accurate enough. If you're walking on a trail, it's pretty accurate in a straight line. It measures your distance pretty well. But when you're doing a lot of jigging and jagging and backtracking, it doesn't really track it well. So when I say 6 miles round trip, it's probably more like, especially mushroom hunting, if I'm really circling around in mushroom hunting, it's probably at least 8 miles in actuality with a more accurate unit. Some of our favorite things to take with us. Hey, walkie-talkies. Walkie-talkies, I think, are a safety tool. They save our bacon. It's so nice to just be able to talk to each other and not have to yell. And in these woods, as you know, as mushroom hunters, if you go with people, you can lose people. Sound does not always travel like you think it would. They can be right on the other side of a little hill and they will not hear you. And walkie-talkies are really convenient. And then you're also not yelling in the woods, which is nice to be out mushroom hunting. You sometimes see people and hear people hollering away for each other. And I don't know, we're just not those people. We kind of talk on our walkie-talkies to each other. We just carry the cheapest ones you can buy because you lose them. We always get the ones with rechargeable batteries for sure. And we usually have a couple so we can give them to people that come with us as well, because usually we don't get lost. It's the people we bring that we worry about. Wet wipes and hand lotion. Oh my gosh, here's what your hands look like. That stuff is awful to get off your fingers, and nothing beats a wet wipe and then some lotion to get your kind of hands cleaned up, because this is really hard on your hands to have all that on there. In a couple of days of doing this, your finger pads will just be raw from handling those mushrooms. Somebody said, cool, what channel? Ham radio goes farther. Yes, Luke, you're so right. Here's the thing though, we're never really more than a couple 100 yards apart. That's why I like the little cheap ones, the small ones. They're light. I don't care if I lose them, which I do. I set it down and lose it. I'm not trying to get 5 miles or a mile even. I'm just trying to talk to Kristen, who is 100 yards away, and I don't want to yell. And I can just communicate over the walkie-talkie a pretty sophisticated idea that I can't yell, hey, whatever it is I need to yell. We love a hanging basket for drying, especially when we're camping. Here's what that looks like. Here's where we talk about the question that came up earlier, like how do you deal with this? Like if you haven't done this, you'll learn the hard way. It's a lot of mushrooms. And you better be ready for some processing, and you better have a plan on how you're going to transport them so they don't go bad. How are you going to dry them out, especially if you're camping? And we often store them in boxes. I try to keep them in this all the time when I'm in the campground. This hanging basket, which lets air flow through it. If it's raining, you can see that blue tarp on the ground. I throw that tarp right over top of it to keep it dry. They do really well in there, and they can keep for days with that kind of air circulation. Otherwise, we try to pack them in cardboard boxes and put them in paper bags. And we often find maybe a creek nearby and put them down under some bushes near a creek, which is usually cooler. It's a lot of work to handle these, so you got to have a plan. Do we transport these back to? Yeah, we transport them back to Colorado for sure. We dry them out. We travel in our camper with 2 or 3 dehydrators that stack up 12 trays high, and usually every couple days we swing into an RV park and we run our dehydrators for 24 hours, and refill all of our water, and all that good stuff with a camper, and then we head back out again. So yeah, we transport them back, but rarely fresh. We like to dry our morels. A dried morel is a delicious morel. They hold up beautifully and taste wonderful and have a great texture. The hanging basket we got on Amazon. I think it's called an herb drying basket. If you look it up, there's different types. Get a sturdy one. They make really big ones. Don't get those. They won't. I mean, this one weighs quite a bit. It's got 15 pounds of mushrooms. I don't know. It's got a lot in there, and the whole thing will sag down if you put 15 pounds in a big one. So don't get a big one. Get a small, sturdy one for your picking in the woods. Let's see here. Let's go back and see what else I had in here. A tarp, a chainsaw. Look, trees fall. If you ever get stuck in the woods without a chainsaw and blocked in a road, it could be difficult. We've had it happen, so we do travel with a chainsaw in the back of our vehicle. We like a proper mushroom knife for sure. Cleaning morels is a full-time job, and if you can pick them and brush off any dust before you put them in your bag. Hopefully your bag has holes in the bottom so dirt falls through. Makes a really big difference. You can harvest morels with a pair of scissors. You can harvest them with a plastic knife, but boy, if they're dirty, you're going to want to get the dirt off them. We have a bag with a mesh and shoulder strap. The shoulder strap is key. You're walking in a mile. You're walking out with 15 or 20 pounds of morels in your bag, or however many, and your arm gets pretty tired carrying that out of the woods, and it's nice to be able to put it over your shoulders. Notice the next two items in there. Bring an extra bag, because you fill the first one, you're a mile deep in the woods, and you do not want to head home because your bag is full. In fact, bring a second extra bag, because you might walk out with 50 pounds that day if you're in the mood. So I always carry a couple of small bags and extra bags in my backpack that I can use in a pinch. Maybe not as my primary foraging bag. Oh, hand lotion's in there twice. It's pretty good stuff. Do you ever use a basket pack? Yeah, Dana asked that one. We have them. I tend to not use them. And the reason I don't use a basket pack is, one is it's just not really a comfortable backpack, the one I have. And it's awkward to be picking morels all the time and have it on your back. Between bending over and trying to get him in, you end up taking it off and setting it down like as a little base camp and picking the whole area and bringing it back to your backpack. And usually what I do is I try to keep a smaller backpack in my bag. I carry my bag, and then I have carabiners. I can clip bags to it if I need to have some extra carrying capacity in my smaller backpack. I just attach it that way. We have a link. Kristen put some links in here. Good. Looks good. Okay, we're doing, oh my gosh, it's 9:30. We better roll through the last couple slides here. There's those dirty hands. Here's that bug I was talking about right here. These are about the only bugs we ever find in morels. Now, occasionally you will find a bug living in a morel like as a home. That's normal. It might be a spider, it might be a centipede, who knows what. That's just a home. But what you don't find typically are ants and worms and maggots infesting the burn morels. What you will find are these little bugs. I wish I remembered the name. I don't. If anybody has it, pop it in there in the chat. They look like sesame seeds, little black sesame seeds, or maybe even ticks at first glance, which is alarming. They're kind of hoppers. They kind of hop around a little bit. We don't like them. If you find those, usually if you go higher in elevation and find a fresher mushroom, they won't be there. They tend to move in like in week 2 on a mushroom if they've been sitting around for a while, which, sometimes you got to pick them. We brush them off. And if you lay them out in a place, those bugs will generally crawl out of your mushrooms, most of them. However, if you're picking those and you let them crawl out, we learned that the hard way in a hotel room by putting a bunch of mushrooms in our hotel room, and there were bugs all over the room. So we started using that as a strategy to get the bugs out that year when we were getting a lot of bugs for a couple days. However, we dehydrated them, and I'll tell you, you pull those dehydrated mushrooms out and they taste great. There's nothing wrong with them, but you get to the bottom of the bag and there's like 50 little dead dried up bugs in the bottom of the dehydrated bag. So they were still in the mushrooms. So that's a difficult thing. Do you care? Do you spend more time cleaning them? How you deal with it? They are very easy to see. So if you're that person, you can spend that extra time, inspect every mushroom, perhaps cut it in half, clean it out. You know, perfectly clean mushrooms, they're not hard to get off. They're just not fun. Let's see, did anybody put the name of that bug in here in the chat? Weevil? Maybe, I mean, I don't think so. I wouldn't call that a weevil, but there is a name for it. They are, okay. We got a couple weevil. Keith, you like that? We're going to call it a weevil, Keith. So there you go. No, Ben, we're calling it a weevil. We're gonna go with Keith on this one. All right, the hanging baskets. I see a question on that. We posted that link into the chat. Thank you, Kristen. Can you dunk morels underwater or otherwise hose them off to get off the dirt or the ash? Yes, you surely can. I don't know if you should. We rarely do it. If the mushrooms are really, really dirty, you can wash them. I would say I would probably prefer to not pick them, but if I need to pick them, I would probably dehydrate them, and I would probably try to get most of the sand off when I rehydrate them later and kind of filter the water out, kind of swirl them around in the water. If you do want to wash them before you dry them, it's important that you wash them and then you air dry them and get them back to normal before you put them in the dehydrator. They really get weird. They change, they turn black, they kind of lose their appeal if you put them into the dehydrator while they're like wet from the wash. I don't think they taste bad, they just don't look as good. So we rarely wash our morels before we dehydrate them. We always wash them before we eat them. It's rare to find a morel that's so clean you don't have to wash it, a quick rinse before you eat it. Okay, we're gonna look at permits now. We're down to about 10 minutes out. I'm sorry, I'm gonna maybe run 5 minutes over. Larry mentioned he's heard salt water. Yeah, I think that's an Eastern Midwest thing where they're trying to get bugs out of the water. I would not do any burn morels with salt water because there's no bugs in them. Permits are required. I put a lot of words in here so you would read them. I apologize. I did this on purpose. Every Forest Service has a permit process. They're all different. Sometimes they band together, two of them work together, but generally anybody that tells you they know the rules for U.S. Forest Service and mushroom picking is wrong. And the reason is the rules are different in every forest. So you got to look up where you're going. You got to go to the Forest Service website and you got to see, do I have to buy a commercial permit? How much is it? Some let you pick a certain amount personally for free. Some require you cut them in half. They all have different rules. We typically go, and typically a commercial permit's $20 and it's good for typically 10 days. Now, it's different everywhere. Keep that in mind. We usually just buy a commercial permit for $20 so that we can like not cut our mushrooms in half and not worry about it. But investigate your local forest before you go there. Check online to conform the rules. Remember that you almost always closed on weekends. You cannot show up Saturday at a ranger's office and get a mushroom permit. In fact, usually on Fridays they close early, like at least a half hour early to permits. You know, they're sometimes they're really friendly. You go in and they're going to give you maps and coffee and be great. And other times they're grumpy and having a bad day there. You know, you never know. Every Forest Service is going to give you a different customer experience. We kind of like it. We kind of like to show up and it's always like, what's it going to be like? Are they going to be friendly? Are they going to offer us maps? Are they going to, you know, they're all so different. It's kind of an adventure to go in and get your permit. And then all kinds of other people walk in too, looking for permits. And you're like, you know, they're like, oh, that guy's not going to find any mushrooms. He's in trouble. And it's only good for that forest when you get it. If you are upset that you have to buy a permit to hunt in public land, you can just take that up with somebody else. Mark said more about a proper knife. That's funny. I have so many mushroom knives right here. Here's a proper example of a proper knife. We have these at modernforager.com. They're $24, which is pretty standard. They're all, you know, there's nothing special. First of all, it's really sturdy. It can handle prying. It can break out big chunks of reishi off of a tree if you need to. But the main thing is this brush right here. Hopefully you can see that in the little screen there. That brush cleans mushrooms. If the brush is too soft, cut it a little shorter, it'll get stiffer. But that's what makes a good mushroom knife, is that brush right there. And you'll find as you pick mushrooms, I'll open this back up, you're picking them and you're spinning the knife around and you're picking them and you're constantly working the brush. and it's really convenient. If the brush is on a different thing, you're constantly putting your knife up and down, and the person that doesn't have a brush on their knife is the person that loses their knife because they set it down to get their brush out. If you're serious about mushroom hunting, you got to get a mushroom knife. I mean, it's 20 bucks. It's the tool for the job. Vicky likes an orange knife so she can see it when she lays it down. I like bright colored knives too. The problem with a lot of them, like here's a fun one, a bright yellow one. It's just so like cheap and hard to open, and it's not a very nice high quality. And then you open the brush and it's like nylon. It's not that nice, you know, hair. I'm not a big fan, even though you can see it and you don't lose it. My advice, Vicky, and to everybody is really simple. You never, ever, ever, never, ever set your mushroom knife down. Never. It always goes in your pocket. If you see your knife on the ground because you set it down, you should like smack yourself because you are only one step away from losing that knife. I've lost more knives than I've found in the woods. Cheap knives are good too, frankly. Oh, Sandy said CMS has a webpage for all the rules for almost everywhere in Oregon where you can hunt. That is awesome. Sandra, can you pop that into the chat so everybody can maybe see that link about where they can hunt? We're going to talk now. We're going to wrap it up. Some people say safety first. I'm like safety last. And not because safety is not important, but I think it is important. And I think we should wrap up and remind everybody burns are dangerous places. Frankly, the Forest Service doesn't want you there. They don't want, I don't want to say the liability, but they don't want to deal. They don't want to do rescues. They know it's dangerous. Trees fall on people. People get lost. You know, they often really don't want you there. But when you get there, the things you want to watch out for are the deep holes. When these trees burn, they leave big holes and you can step in one. And I think probably the biggest risk you're in a burn is number one, getting lost. Number two is really spraining your ankle or your knee in a big hole because you can you're looking for mushrooms and you're walking around not looking and you can step right into like a foot deep hole and hurt yourself. The other thing I worry about is rain a lot. Flash floods are bad news. They'll wash out roads and trap you. Don't go hunting right after a rain. That ash is slick, and if you're on a hillside, I mean, it'll be something like out of a movie. You will slide down that hill and you will die. It's super slippery when it's really wet with a big rain. Wind also, that wind gets us out of the woods faster than anything. When the wind starts howling and all those dead trees are moving around, we're out of there. I don't want to be the guy that gets killed by a falling tree. So I'd say watch out for that stuff. Those are dangerous. This is not a morel. This is what we were talking about before, whether they're verpas or gyrometras. You're going to want to know what a morel is and what a morel isn't. That's not what this webinar is about. But if you don't know, if you don't know this is not a morel, you're not ready to go out looking quite yet. A little bit of etiquette. I think this is interesting, and we're going to wrap up with etiquette. Like, what is the etiquette here? One is very clear. Steer clear of other pickers' lines. You see other people in the woods picking. You don't go pick in front of them to beat them to their mushrooms. You let them have their space. That's probably the most common kind of breach you see out in the woods are people that kind of come into your little personal zone. Obviously, leave no trash. The other stuff is common sense. I'm curious if you have any etiquette. Pop it in the chat here and let's see what it is. A lot of it's common courtesy. I think you should share your catch, you know, be generous with your mushrooms, give them to other people to try. You should take someone new. Remember, these are burns. You're not taking them to any secret spots, and the more eyes you got looking, the better. That's kind of my etiquette. I think it's pretty common sense. Now, the other end to think about is you can't really overpick. Remember, first of all, these are fungus. These are mushrooms. You're picking the fruit. You're not hurting the plant. It's not a plant, but you know what I mean. And these things only come up every 50 years maybe. And I think overpicking is a hilarious concept. Like, wait a minute, you think I'm going to pick all these mushrooms? I'm not going to miss a bunch, and that there's not a million acres right over there that these are not everywhere doing their thing. And then there's also multiple flushes. If you really were going to pick them all, you'd have to scour the forest for weeks. I don't think overpicking is an issue here. I think pick all you want. It doesn't have any impact on the mushrooms or the habitat. I don't think wildlife eats these. I have never, ever seen a single indicator that any animal likes to eat these. Even the bugs don't seem to eat them. They'll make a home in them, but they don't seem to eat them. So no deer. You know, if you see a turkey eating one, they're eating the bugs off. Don't fool yourself. They're not eating the mushroom. You know, yeah, you can use a mesh bag and spread the spores all around for sure. I don't know that it makes a difference. I think these things are spewing spores from the minute they pop up, and you know, the spores everywhere, and a spore load in the forest with these things must be huge. I like a mesh bag because it lets my mushrooms breathe and the dirt falls out the bottom, so I get cleaner mushrooms. And people don't, you know, I don't use plastic bags, that's for sure. They ruin your mushrooms. Cutting, pulling doesn't make a difference. There's no science. That's strictly opinions, and usually the person that tells you that you're doing it wrong is just telling you they don't actually know what they're talking about. So cut or pull, you know, use your preference, and don't tell anybody else how to do it, because it doesn't matter. It's kind of like how you're going to put your pants on. It's your way. See if we got any more questions here. Good. All right, so I'm just going to finish this up with a fun slide. Somebody asked me about mountain bikes. Yes, we take e-bikes with us to get deeper into the woods. You can see our e-bike there is kind of loaded down with some mushrooms from a successful hunt. This one was down at the Blanket Fire, I believe. And then other little fun piece of nature to wrap this up. We don't see a lot of nature in these woods. I remain surprised by, we don't see just a lot of animals in there, birds even, big animals, mammals like elk or deer, fox. We see very little footprints too, not as many as you would think. Now I'm sure, don't get mad at me, I just don't think animals are really thriving in these forests the spring after a burn. It's probably a difficult place for them to be. And if I were a deer, I'd probably head the next hill over where there wasn't a burn. But the birds nest in there, and there's some fun blue eggs in a burned tree, which is just a really beautiful sight. We have found a couple birds nests like that before in the woods. So if we don't have any other questions, I think I'm going to wrap up, and I will remind everybody we're going to save up a recording up to YouTube here in just a little bit. We'll send out a notification to everybody that registered how to get that. That will probably happen tomorrow. I have a hunch that loading will take us into the evening. Our website is modernforager.com. Say hi. We love talking about burn morels. We're on Facebook, and the other thing is we're not secretive about it. If you call us up and tell us, you know, you're finding them, or we'll ask you questions, and we'll tell other people what's going on out there, and likewise we'll tell you, yeah, they're at about 4,500 feet right now, and it seems like the picking's good, or, you know, we're pretty open with this information. So feel free to stay in touch. Thank you, everybody, for the nice words. Thank you. I see everybody signing off. I am going to close this down now. So, hey guys, happy hunting. I hope you find lots of morels this year, and I hope you stay in touch with Kristen and I. Bye-bye.